Good day, everyone, and welcoming us all to the OpenEd 21 conference. I wish all of us a wonderful learning experience as the conference progresses. My name is Abiola Bukola Elaturoti, a librarian from Leeds City University, Ibadan, Nigeria in West Africa. My co-author is Dr. Kolawole Aramide, the head of Department of School Library and Media Technology, University of Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria. The title of our presentation is Exchanging Knowledge Across Borders, Open Education Around the World. In this presentation, we'll have the introduction, principles of open education, issues for discussion in open education across the world, and then we have the conclusion. The objectives of the presentation are to create understanding for open education, get a better understanding of open education resources and attack technologies, create awareness about disparities in open education practices in different regions of the world, identify reasons for the disparities in open education practices. The definition of open. What does it mean to be open? When something is open, according to Farzad, Ali, and Salim in 2020, to be open means something can be used by anyone without discrimination with regards to status, race, gender, geographical boundaries, and other criteria. Education is part of the United Nations Declarations on Human Rights, and it is also part of the Sustainable Development Goals. But for one reason or the other, it is not everybody all around the world that has access. It is not everybody that have access to education. And this is one of the things, the major thing that open education is trying to address. Furthermore, openness also means that education can be accessed anywhere and at any time. It is free from licensing restrictions. It is free from issues like copyright arising from intellectual property. It is freely available, and then it is reusable. The open educational resources can be taken, adopted, and adapted for reuse by both the students and the learners as they deem fit and as they need or require. So when we say something is open, when we say education is open, it means that there are no barriers at all to education. Open education is a philosophy about the way people should produce, share, and build on knowledge, which is what we have discussed earlier about openness. That is, in open education, when we say an educational resource is open, it means that education is free. It means that one must be able to access education or educational resources at no cost. Cost is not a barrier. Tuition fees, no tuition fees, no cost of educational materials, and other costs that may be attached to education. And then users, students, and the teachers, the instructors, they also have the legal rights to reuse such educational resources. They have the right to revise. They have the right to remix and then to redistribute the resource and then adapt it to their own use or for their own environment or context. So in open education, there are no barriers at all. There is no barrier. My next slide shows the characteristics of open education. And what are these characteristics? It's just like a pictorial representation of the things we discussed, we mentioned earlier. Open education is accessible. That is, there are no restrictions at all. It doesn't have to be in a physical building where the instructor or teachers or lecturers and the students will have to meet. There is no password access, and then there is also no fee for access, such that tuition fee or having to put in password and so on will now be a barrier. It is accessible. And following is the fact that open educational materials are reusable. They can be republished. They leave room for modification. Both students and instructors can modify it, can modify either part of it or in its entirety in order to suit their own purposes. It can be republished. It can allow modification. And then when we talk about openness, it is open to anybody and everybody, just like we mentioned. Education is part of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. It is also part of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, meaning that education is a right of all. But in the real sense of it, in the world in which we are today, does everybody actually have a right to education? So when we say education is open, it is usable even for people with disabilities, irrespective, or properly put again, people with physical challenges, that is physically challenged, the deaf, the dumb, the blind, even the sick, and others in such categories. Then it is usable for teaching purposes. And then it is usable for studying on the part of the learners. There are no participation limits. Open education is also free. That is freedom, meaning that it can be used for any educational purpose, and then users of open education, subscribers to it, they can study how the program works and changes so that they can adopt and adapt it to suit their purposes, as earlier said. They can also redistribute the copies so that they can help others, since it is free. There can also be improvements to the programs, to open education programs, such that it can be made better. And then it is also an avenue of learning through which humans can learn one from the other at no cost. And then there are no language barriers because majority of the courses are in English. And then the resources, just like I mentioned earlier, open educational resources are free. Students don't need to attend physical classes in order to have access to these resources. And then they also do not need time and money to travel, because these things are available online. And these are the characteristics of open education. Benefits: improvement in students' performance and satisfaction. It also leaves room for wider participation in education, irrespective of geographical location, irrespective of age, sex, or gender, and so on, irrespective of religion. It also leaves room for critical reflection by educators with evidence of improvement in their practice. It also allows informal learners to develop their own forms of study support and also to use a variety of indicators when selecting open educational resources. It can also act as a bridge to formal education. Many people or most users, most subscribers to open education have one reason or the other why they go for open education, and ranging from cost. Some even have the resources, but distance may be a barrier or family issues. So they see this as a bridge to their getting formal education. Then informal assessments motivate learners using open education resources. Now, according to Blessinger and Bliss 2018, there are 5 principles of open education, which I've mentioned in the earlier discussion, in the earlier slides. Open education is designed for access. It is designed to remove all barriers, any form of barrier to education, such that people all around the world can have access. And then 2, it is designed for agency. Agency in the sense that users or subscribers to open education may decide to adopt it anywhere, anytime. They can even recommend it for others to use. And just like the first principle, without any form of litigation, legal barriers or costs or other form of barriers. It is also designed for ownership, because users or participants in open education are not limited by any laws or familiar rules or having to be physically present in within the 4 walls of a building, but they can take it and adapt it and adopt it for their own use. They can personalize the content of the open education, and they may even decide to modify it. Then it is designed also for participation. When open education is designed, both the instructors and users, irrespective of whatever the criterion, must be taken into consideration. The end users or subscribers to open education must find it useful, must find it worthy, must find it simple enough for them to understand and to also adopt and apply within their context. And then it is designed for experience. That is, any technology that is adopted for open education must be suitable for both the instructors and then the users. It must be user-friendly. Users must be able to interact and interrogate with the such open education technologies and resources, and they must find it very useful and worthwhile. So now, 2 major issues that we are dwelling in this presentation: the issue of access and then the issue of barriers. When we talk about access, can anyone legally and freely copy, use, adapt, and reshare open educational resources? What are these open educational resources? They are the resources that are adopted for open education, and they can be legally and freely copied. They can be legally and freely used, adapted, and reshared even amongst users and their neighbors, so to speak. The resources may be in form of, online textbooks, videos, audios, audiovisual, and so on. So there is no barrier, or there is access, free access. An example is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's open courseware, where they have hundreds of thousands of courseware at no cost at all. Anybody from any part of the world can easily access these resources. And then the issue of barrier. What are barriers? Things that can pose as hindrances to the use of open education, adoption of open education, and usage of open education resources. And these barriers can be in form of technology. You know, it is with improvements in technology that we also have improvements in education, and and this improvement is what is bringing about open education and open educational resources. So open education is completely backed by information and communication technologies, and where these are absent or they are inadequate, inadequacy will serve as barrier to open education. Legal issues, there should be no legal issues arising. The issue of copyright and copyright laws, intellectual property, should not come in at all. Anybody, anywhere, all around the world should have access to education and open education resources freely and without fear of litigation. We also have institutional and national barriers, where some institutions, several institutions all over the world are still not in tune. They are still not seeing open education as a concept of importance. Their national policies also may also serve as barrier. Then the issue of relevance now is the open education and the resources that come with it. Is it relevant? Where this is when we talk about the issue of context. Is it relevant within the context in which it is being introduced? We also have the social barrier, in which, you know, individuals may see themselves as not worthy of education, or that maybe education is reserved for a certain echelon, a certain class within the society. So all these can serve as barriers. Now, talking about the issue of open education across the world. Of course, when we talk about the world, we have different countries, different regions, and continents. Now, countries are at various stages of open education acceptance. While many are still on raising awareness about open education and the potential benefits, others are still dealing with the digital divide issues or struggling with business models and sustainability issues. Now, we know that there is a wide educational gap between the developed and the developing countries. We said that open education resources are free to use, to be copied, and to be reshared for usage. The very first one is the effect of colonialism, historical effects of colonialism. Many developing countries have been colonized in the past, and you know, because the citizens of these developing countries, they knew what their forefathers went through and what they also are still going through because of the issue of colonialism. And so that lack of trust in whatever is coming from the Western world, from the developed world, is there. So when they are coming, and part of it is this open education. So they may believe that, oh, it's all still part of the colonial masters' scheme to keep them in bondage. And that is why one of the major reasons it has not been fully, adopted. Another one is language issues. Now, these developing countries have their own language or languages, but one will discover that these open education resources are, coming majorly in English language, such that anyone or any user or participant in open education that has not undergone training or course in English language will not be able to take part or use these resources. Then we also have lack of cultural diversity. Like we said, majority of these things come in Western English language. Then educational privilege and literacy, poor infrastructure, talking in terms of and linking it with lack of adequate international information and communication technologies equipment. These are not enough. They are expensive, and then users or potential participants or users may even see them as too complicated for their own usage. Then lack of adequately skilled manpower in these lesser developed countries. All these come together to form barriers to the adoption, although some countries like Nigeria are adopting these open education principles and concepts, but it is not fully adapted for the context of the country yet. In conclusion, we have said that the educational gap between the developed and developing regions of the world remain wide despite developments in the educational field. Many all over the world still do not have access to education, and its present openness notwithstanding. Despite the openness of education, we are talking about open education, internet facilities, and other information communication technologies. Many all over the world still do not have access. So, can the Western policymakers avoid the recurrence of some of the failures of the past few decades? That is the question we want to leave with us. How can policymakers all over the world ensure that education actually gets to even the grassroots in these developing countries? The developed world also have their own issues, but majority of these issues are felt in the developing countries. Thank you for listening, and I wish every one of us once again a happy and wonderful experience at the Open Education International Conference 2021.